Alright, what is up? Welcome back to Literally Nothing But Everything podcast. I'm Mike Rispoli, and if you would be so kind, if you guys like what you hear, please make sure that you like and subscribe to help me out. Maybe share it with one of your friends if you think that they would like it. And if you guys want to write in, you can find me at lnbemedia@gmail.com. I also have my socials on Instagram and TikTok. On Instagram, you can find me at the LNBE Pod, and on TikTok, you can find me at the LNBE Podcast. Fair warning, there's not much, but I'm doing what I can here. I'm a one-man show. But if you want to help me out, I would really appreciate it. And you see what I did there? This time I added all this stuff at the beginning of the episode so you don't have to sit through an episode of bullshit if you don't like what you hear and have to wait until the end of it to get there. So, working on it. We're working on it. I'm figuring it out. We'll get there. But with that said, let's get this bitch started. So what in the hell am I going to talk about this week? So I'm actually recording this on Sunday, which happens to be Father's Day. And unless somebody out there knows something that I don't, I am not a father, but happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. And this doesn't include the women who call their boyfriends daddy. Like, you guys are not fathers. You guys are just dating somebody with daddy issues. There's a difference. Honestly though, can somebody please explain to me why that is even a thing? I don't understand it. Like, how is that a turn on? Like, oh, daddy, like, give me a fucking break. It's just so cringy. And with that said, I would be remiss if I did not talk about Nick Cannon, because on Instagram, I was poking around and I saw there was something where he was going to give his kids the opportunity to connect with them. Which to me kind of begs the question of, does he even know all of his kids? I know he's got 12 of them. But I don't know, to me, that terminology doesn't really make it sound like he really even cares. Like, I don't know. You're not going to really win any Fathers of the Year mugs with that kind of attitude. Like, I don't know if does he know his kids? Does he know who they are? Like, does he even know all the names of his 12 kids? I don't know. That just kind of seems like an asshole move, in my opinion. Like, you're going to have all these kids, but then you're not going to get to know them. And then you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I'll just allow you to talk to me if it kind of fits with what I'm doing and if you even want to deal with it. So, I don't know. If you have a kid and they don't want to talk to you, and it's kind of like up to them, it's their decision, that kind of tells you something about the guy. I feel like somebody needs to tell Nick Cannon that just having a kid doesn't necessarily make you a father. Like, it's not like you're just putting up stats with how many kids you can have, that's what makes you a dad. Like, Nick Cannon kind of turned the idea of fatherhood into an Olympic sport. Like, it's not the amount of kids that you have that make you the greatest dad of all time. Like, just racking up numbers doesn't necessarily mean that you are the greatest. Like, Frank Gore, for example, he's a former running back. He's number 3 in rushing yards all time. But just because he's number 3 in rushing yards, I personally wouldn't have him in my top 5 all-time list. Because, yeah, just because you have the numbers. But he was never, like, a feared player. Nobody really looked at Frank Gore and was like, oh my God, we're playing Frank Gore. How are we going to defend this guy? Like, he's just the definition of longevity making stats. Like, he played in the league for 16 seasons, but he was never an all-pro. I think he only made a Pro Bowl 5 times. And to put that in perspective, Brady played for 23 years? And he was a 15-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time first-team All-Pro, and a 3-time second-team All-Pro. Frank Gore was also never an MVP candidate. Brady was an MVP candidate 3 times in his career. And you could say, oh, well, MVP candidacy, that's just determined by being a quarterback. But all right, let's look at another running back then. You got Adrian Peterson, who's a top 5 running back all time, I would say. He was an MVP candidate back in 2012. He had 4 first-team All-Pros, 3 second-team All-Pros. He played for 15 seasons. The dude also broke 2,000 yards after coming off of an ACL injury. So even though AP doesn't have as many rushing yards all time as Frank Gore, I would still rank AP higher than Frank Gore because he has the, not only the statistics, but he's also got the, resume to back up his greatness. Like, to me, Frank Gore is just that guy at work who just reaches a seniority level just due to this, longevity because he's just naturally putting up numbers due to how long he's been working for some company. And now all of a sudden, because he's been there for so long, that he was just gifted a senior level position. Just getting the average 3 yards a carry for every game for 15 seasons, of course you're just going to rack up numbers. So if we look back at Nick Cannon, just because you're racking up stats of kids, you also got to be involved in their lives and prove to yourself that you're actually a good dad. But I don't even know if he's involved in his kids' lives. So that's not going to be winning you any Father of the Year awards. I mean, look at former quarterback Phillip Rivers. That dude's got double-digit kids. I think he's up to 10 now. But I can guarantee you that that guy knows every single name of his kids. He can tell you what grade they're in, their interests, their hobbies, what they're doing. Like, that guy is actually involved in his kids' lives. He's also a great family man. That's what makes you a great dad, is just being there, to quote Modern Family. Didn't the character Jay have a quote that said 90% of being a dad is just showing up? So, I don't know. It's kind of like no different than the band who's been on tour for the past 40 years. They really don't have the album sales. They never really gained a following. Does that mean that they should get into like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the Country Music Hall of Fame or whatever the fuck it is just due to their longevity? No. You got to put up the numbers. You got to be involved. Kind of goes back to what I talked about last week about all these rich fucks in my neighborhood just having a kid just to say they have a kid. But they're not willing to put in the effort. And that's fucking Nick Cannon to a T. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. But alright, moving on. How was your guys' weekend? What'd you guys do? Per usual, I ended up at the bar over the weekend. And it's funny because I'm also now a year sober. Not to totally pat myself on the back here, but I work at a bar. So I feel like that's kind of impressive. I'm like a real life Sam Malone if you've ever watched Cheers, except I don't get nearly as many chicks. But I think a couple weeks ago, or maybe this was last week, I mentioned that I had an event that I had to go to, and people at the event were like, "Oh, what are you drinking?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'm like pretty much a year sober at this point. It was a week before I hit my mark." As if I say that like I was an alcoholic and I have my chip. But they were like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I had no idea." And I feel like that's just like the way that our society is now, where they're just so surprised that somebody just makes the decision to go sober when they don't have a problem. Like, I have to then follow up with, it's not like I had a problem. It was just something that I made a decision for myself that I'm like, I'm not going to do this for my own health reasons, because it just started catching up with me on a physical level. And I started hating the fact of waking up like shit every time I was going out because I just didn't want to deal with the fucking hangover anymore. Like, that was mostly it. I was just exhausted of it. So I made the decision to just cut it out. And because it wasn't necessarily an issue for me, I don't really even miss it. But, like, I don't know. It's just wild to me that due to the fact that alcohol as a substance, or maybe even alcoholism in general, is just so socially acceptable, that the only reason that people think you stop is because you had a problem. Like, they were so apologetic of even asking if I wanted a drink, as if it was like some sort of like pressure. But what I couldn't say is the fact that the only reason I would have wanted to drink anyway is just to fucking deal with you people. So it really wasn't even that big of a deal. It's funny because on Saturday I wasn't scheduled to bounce. I was actually scheduled to work the bar. And I was chatting up some of the girls, and one of the girls was asking how old I was. And I was like, you know what, take a guess. Let me see how old they think I am. And one of the girls said she thought I was like 35, and I'm just like, damn, you think I'm 35? I must be fucking aging like cheese. So maybe it's a good thing that I kind of stopped drinking. And it's funny because there was another girl who came up to me and she had a drink in her hand, and I had also just told her that I was sober because she asked me why I never drink when I'm there, and she just goes, "Is this vodka or is this tequila? Can you taste it?" But I just had a 10-minute conversation with her about me being sober, and she was all like, "Congratulations, I don't think I could ever do it." And now here she is asking me to like taste her drink. I'm just like, what did we just talk about for the last 10 minutes? But also the fact that she didn't know what she was drinking meant that she couldn't taste it, which meant that I did my job right. So I can't really fully complain. Plus, honestly, she was pretty cute. So maybe that was just her way of trying to flirt. Who the fuck knows? But I think it also stands a testament to show how short of attention span. Now, she might have just been drunk. It could be that. But I also wonder if that's just due to the fact that her attention span was just non-existent, because the fact that she couldn't even remember a conversation that we had just had, I was just like, wow. It's a good thing that I know you're drinking alcohol, because that's the only substance I can think of that you even have. Like, there is such a disconnect between like the younger kids. I don't know what it is. And it's funny because some of them are chill, but then you get these dummies who just like cannot have a conversation. And I don't know if it's just due to this whole virtual technology shit where everything is just done through your phone, but I'll try and talk to some of the like kids at the bar. But you got to keep in mind, these are 21 to 22 year olds. Some of them are 23, and that's funny because the 23, 24 year olds who come in, they're the ones who can actually like hold a little bit more of a conversation, because now they're kind of like quote unquote in the real world. But the 21 and 22-year-olds who haven't graduated yet, like after the conversation of where do you go to school, what do you study, that's pretty much it. Because they just have nothing really going on in their lives. Unless you're like talking shit about memes or whatever they see like on their phones, they can't talk about anything. And granted, I'm also still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. So asking them, oh, what do you plan on doing like once you graduate? They have no clue. So I can't really fault them for that. But you should be able to at least somewhat hold a conversation and ask me a question back if you actually want to talk to me. Like, we are in the social setting of a bar. You're coming up to have a conversation with me, and then it just abruptly ends, and we're both just kind of staring at each other for those awkward 5 seconds of like, is this going to continue? And then you got to do that awkward walk away of like, oh, I guess this is over now. And it's not all of them. Like, there are the ones who come in and you actually get to know them. You kind of figure out like what they're about. You hang out with them while they're there and while you're working. Like, it really is not all of them, but it's a good 50-50. So I don't know if it's just their interest level in you, if they just don't find you interesting, and they're just like, I just want this conversation to end and I want to go hang out with my friends, or whatever it is. But I also do somewhat wonder if it's just due to the fact of like attention span and not being able to hold a conversation because it's just not 24/7, and having a conversation takes commitment. Like, it does take commitment to have a conversation and to speak with somebody because you have to do something uninterrupted for the better part of 5 minutes at least. So if your attention span is only 2 minutes, you're not going to fucking get to talking to someone. Like, if I'm behind the bar and if I'm serving you drinks, part of my job is also to make it an enjoyable experience for you. And that involves conversing and talking, joking around, having a little fun. Plus, I mean, let's be real. If I'm behind the bar, I'm also trying to make some tips here. So the more that I'm conversing, joking, chatting with you, I'm also thinking like, hey, if I can make their experience a little bit more enjoyable, then maybe they'll give me a little bit something back because they just enjoyed their time there. But I can't do that if you're also not willing to hold a conversation. But part of the problem too is this younger generation, they're all just a bunch of morons. Like, Saturday I was behind the bar helping out, and then Friday night I was at the bar bouncing. And Friday night, there really wasn't anything crazy, but there was one situation that I had where this kid comes over to me and he's like, oh dude, I forgot my wallet. And I'm like, that seems like a whole lot of not my fucking problem. Like, who goes out to a bar and doesn't have their wallet? So I tell him, I'm like, dude, you don't have an ID. I can't let you in. Like, that's not my fucking fault that you're an idiot and forgot your ID. So he goes, well, I can show you a photo of my ID on my phone. I'm like, that could be photoshopped. Like, I think I've mentioned that they try and pull this stunt before on this podcast. And again, I'm like, I'm not accepting that. If I can't see your ID and see if it's fake or real, I'm not letting you in. I don't care who's vouching for you. It's not my problem. You should have done your due diligence and been responsible and at least done one thing right and brought your ID, you stupid idiot. So he goes, okay, well, I'll just like run home and go get it. I'm like, yeah, you do that. So 20 minutes later, he comes back and he proceeds to show me a fake ID. And I'm like, dude, not only did you forget your ID because you probably knew it was a fake and I wasn't going to let you in, but then you went home anyways and brought me a fake. So I don't know how stupid you actually could be, but now you're wasting all of our time. And then he had a friend who was in the bar. So the way that the bar is set up is there's a front door and there's a back door. And we lock the back door so that way we can try and avoid this. But he, I guess, had a friend in the bar, so he just like went around the back, texted his friend, hey, let me in through the back. But what he doesn't know is I have actually made some friends at the bar who know the kid, and they were like, hey, by the way, he still got in. And it's not a matter of ratting out. That's not why they do it. They're not trying to be rats. What they're doing is it's because they think it's funny when somebody tries to pull a stunt like that and then they get caught. Like, they actually enjoy seeing me tossing these people out because they're just idiots, and you fuck around and you gotta find out. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. But I will say, to his credit, he was pretty good about it. Like, I just put my hand on his shoulder, walked him over to the bar, made sure that he had his tab paid out, and I just tossed him out. So that was that. But It's just the stupidity of it. And again, it's just the entitlement factor. Like, just because you want to do something doesn't mean that you have the ability to. And maybe it just comes with the territory of living in an affluent town like Greenwich, where these kids are just super entitled and think they can do whatever they want. So now I gotta now play the role of parent and teach these kids, hey, you're not allowed to just do whatever you want. So I'm actually going to be setting the precedent here of just because you want something doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to give it to you. Like, I'm going to do what your fucking parents aren't able to do and tell you the words fucking no. Just because your parents give you everything you want, I have no affiliation with you. I can give a fuck about you, so I don't care. You're not my problem. But at this point, you are my responsibility and it's a liability. And at the end of the day, I'm ultimately just doing my job. I'm doing what I was hired for. I'm not trying to be an enemy, but you were the asshole to begin with. And now you're going to make it seem like I'm the asshole when you were the dickhead initially to begin with. And now the girls that you were with don't want to talk to me because I'm the anti-fun police and you're fucking inadvertently acting like a cockblock and ruining my chances at a good time. Like, go fuck yourself. Okay, now that rant's over, let's kind of get into the segment that we did last week. So last week we brought up the idea of artists who need to hang it up because they're just too old and can't perform, and then maybe people who could replace those people if you wanted to continue seeing them. So I actually did get a couple write-ins from it, and some people mentioned the Rolling Stones. But I gotta be honest, I'm kind of 50-50 with the Rolling Stones, because Mick Jagger can still sing and perform pretty well. My issue is actually Keith Richards, because Keith Richards just doesn't fucking play the guitar anymore. I've actually seen videos of him where, like, the guitar is playing in the background. Now, I don't know if that's Ronnie Wood actually being able to play his guitar parts, and then they just kind of fill in Keith Richards' part with, like, background music or whatever. But, like, I watch Keith Richards just walking around the stage, not even strumming his guitar, and I'm still hearing his guitar part. So I don't know if it's just the fact that he's just looped out of his mind and he's just not playing anymore. I thought he was sober for however many years now, but the dude just really can't perform. I don't really know who I could think of to replace him. So if anyone has any ideas, write in and let me know, because I think Keith Richards is just like such a unique guitarist and I can't think of anybody that would be kind of on his level. But in general, I think the Rolling Stones do need to call it a quits at some point, just because I don't even know how many surviving members of the band there are. I think there's only 3. I think it's Mick, Keith, and Ronnie Wood, because didn't Charlie Watts just pass away in 2021? So I feel like once there's really no more surviving original members of the band, or at least like members of the band of when you guys were at your height of popularity, you should just call it a quits, because at that point it's like, who are you going to see? Like, you're not really going to see the band. You're just going to see like a remembrance of the band. And for me, I also feel that way with AC/DC. AC/DC is like one of my top 5 favorite bands of all time, but I don't know if I would go and see them just because Brian Johnson can't really perform anymore. He's got that ear thing where he's going deaf. Malcolm died. Phil Rudd's no longer drumming for them. So I'm like, who am I going to go see? Just to go see Angus? And I just saw a video of Angus trying to play Thunderstruck, and he couldn't really keep up with it. He was playing it really sloppily. So I'm like, I don't want that to be how I'm going to remember seeing this band if I do get to see them. I feel like it would just kind of be a disappointment. But alright, continuing on with this idea of artists who should hang it up. Another group that I think really needs to hang it up is The Who. I don't know when the last time they toured was, but I just saw that Roger Daltrey's going on tour now, and I'm like, dude, I've seen videos of you. You can barely hold your breath while you're singing anymore. You still have a strong voice, but you're just not able to perform. Now, I also think that Pete Townsend needs to give it up, because I also kind of low-key think he's an overrated guitarist. I think he's a fantastic songwriter, but in terms of like technique of the guitar, I mean, he's a fantastic musician in the sense of his chord progressions and stuff, but technique-wise, I don't really know anything that he truly did to revolutionize the guitar, except for doing his windmill technique, which is more of just like his on-stage persona. Like, that's not something that you're just gonna do in a studio. But I also know for a fact that that dude just cannot sing anymore. Like, if you try and listen to him try and sing Baba O'Reilly right now, where that high part kicks in, that's him singing. He just cannot sing anymore. So I think if the Who were to kind of keep playing around, if anybody were to try and do a supergroup for them as a tribute, I think the guy that could replace Roger Daltrey is easily Sammy Hagar. like, fuck trying to do Van Halen covers. I think Sammy Hagar could actually take over for them because Sammy's kind of in that same registry almost. He's got that raspiness to his voice. He's a little bit higher pitched, but Sammy can still sing. I just saw Sammy doing something on Howard Stern performing the Van Halen tribute band stuff where they played Right Now. And Sammy still sounds really good. And if you need somebody to do Pete Townshend's vocals, I know that because Sammy's worked with him so much, given Van Halen, Chickenfoot, and I think they're in a band now called The Circle, you can have Michael Anthony performing the backing vocals and taking over Pete Townshend's parts, because Michael Anthony, holy crap, talk about one of the most underrated singers of all time. He's just a backing vocalist, but without his backing vocals on Van Halen does not have their sound. I know he's pretty much in like every underrated list of all time, but the dude just never seems to get his props. So Michael Anthony can easily take over. I also think if you wanted to have somebody take over for Pete Townsend, you could probably have John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers take over to have your guitarist and also have a guy who can sing that much higher registry. But alright, and then my third and final pick, and I also got some write-ins for this person. I thought about mentioning him last week, but I was like, I might need people to talk about this week. The last person I want to talk about is Madonna. I mean, in general, it's not that I don't think she can sing. I mean, I don't think she could have even sang back in the 80s. I think her voice is just awful. Like, live, at least. I think the studio does a lot of her work for her. But in general, I think Madonna just needs to give it up just because her stick is over. I mean, she's 65 years old, still trying to come across as a sex symbol. And I'm just like, you don't see many grandmas out there trying to act sexy. So I just think for the sake of what her act is, I think she needs to give it up. Like, honestly, leave it to Britney Spears or leave it to whoever the fuck else who's younger and trying to take over that sect for you. And you know what, though? Honestly, just given the fact of, like, acts, just because I feel like they're too old for doing what they were doing, I think Green Day needs to kind of figure out something new because you guys are probably in, what, your 40s or your 50s? Maybe your early 60s at this point, and you're still trying to come across as like angsty teenagers. Like, guys, figure out a new formula for how you're going to come across on stage. I don't think you guys don't need to not perform because Green Day still sounds amazing live, but I think they need to kind of veer to like what their age group is. That's the whole reason why Metallica kind of like changed their look, because music was evolving, Metallica was evolving, so they kind of changed their look. And I think Green Day kind of needs to do that same thing. But actually, you know what, speaking of, if you are going to go see Metallica, like, I know I'm talking a lot of shit about like older bands, but Metallica is still fantastic. I saw Metallica back in, I want to say, 2018, and that was one of the best shows that I'd ever seen. And maybe I'm a little biased just because I'm also a huge Metallica fan, and I gotta say, Lars was actually playing pretty well. Like, if you don't know who Lars is, he's their drummer, and he's notorious for not being able to, like, keep time, and he's really known as more of, like, an intermediate type drummer just because of, like, where he is in his career. His skill level doesn't seem to match, but I personally think that without Lars, you don't have Metallica's sound, so it kind of works for them. Kind of like Ringo with the Beatles, like, there were probably so many other better drummers for the Beatles, but Ringo kind of gave them their sound. So that's kind of how I look at it. Like, Lars is just the Ringo of metal. But overall, I will admit, Lars is low-key, like, a very overrated drummer, just because the dude just has an issue with keeping time. And as a drummer, that is literally your whole job. Besides learning new chops and figuring out a better skill level as you evolve, you gotta learn how to keep time. But honestly, who the fuck am I to talk? I can't play in a band because when I was playing the guitar, this goes back to something I said like one of the earlier episodes of this thing. As I was learning the guitar, I never truly learned how to hone in on the craft, so I never played to a metronome, so I can't play to time for shit, but I'm also not getting paid to do it. Lars is. So if I'm going to be paying for something, I want to see perfection. Alright, but now the last thing I want to say is, because I kind of brought this up last time, are artists who can keep putting out music, but shouldn't necessarily perform, like people who can still sing but they're just too old to perform. And I feel like that kind of goes along with like maybe the Rolling Stones, like if they wanted to keep putting out music because they still sound good as a band, they're just a little old to keep performing, so maybe they go more into this category. But I think Dolly Parton is somebody who I think should still put out music, but she needs to stop performing. And the only reason I'm saying this is because when I was watching those football games on Thanksgiving last year, I saw her do a performance, and she could barely move. I mean, granted, she is pushing 80, but I don't know, if you really can't move around on stage and you're just going to be standing there just to sing, at that point, just put out a single so we can still enjoy the music that you want to put out. We don't necessarily need to see you. Or at least if you do want to perform, just bring out a chair. Like, there's no problem with you just standing around. You don't need to try and put on a performance. I mean, granted, maybe she was a little stiff because she's more plastic than she is person at this point in her life, but I don't know. I'll leave you guys to decide on that one. But, alright, that does it for me this week. That's pretty much all I could think of to talk about. Hopefully you guys enjoyed what you heard. And if you guys are liking some of these segments, feel free to write in and share your opinion. Again, you can find me at lnbemedia@gmail.com. I'll read out who you suggest along with your opinions, and then I'll also share my thoughts on the matter. So, alright guys, that does it for me. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll catch up with you next Tuesday.